let us understand price elasticity of demand. Well, what is price elasticity of demand? With price elasticity of demand, we try to understand the changes in demand due to changes in price. The mathematical relation between price and quantity demanded can be established with price elasticity of demand. According to Professor Alfred Marshall, price elasticity of demand is the ratio of proportionate change in the quantity demanded of a commodity to proportionate change in its price. Mathematically, price elasticity of demand can be written as percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. We can convert this mathematical relation into formula, mathematical symbolic formula, that is percentage change in quantity demanded, percentage delta D, over percentage change in price, that is percentage P. Let us understand the meaning of these symbols and we'll further simplify it mathematically. Well, delta D is change in demand. So change in quantity demanded can be written as Q1 minus Q, that is new quantity minus original quantity. So change in quantity demanded is delta D. Similarly, change in price, well, delta P, that is new price minus original price. So once we know this, can we convert this whole concept of elasticity demand into furthermore mathematical simpler level? Yes, we can write that percentage change in quantity demanded as delta D over D, original price, divide by percentage change in price as delta P over P. If you further simplify, I can write this in a very simplistic fashion, that is delta D over D, that is change in demand over original demand, into original price upon change in price. Well, price elasticity of demand can be of 5 types. It can be infinite, it can be 0, it can be unit, it can be less than 1, it can be greater than 1. And that's where it gets into different types. Price elasticity of demand can be 0, we call it as perfectly inelastic demand. When price elasticity of demand is between 0 to 1, we call it as relatively inelastic demand. When price elasticity of demand is 1, we can call it as unitary elastic demand. When it is greater than 1, we call it as relatively elastic demand. And when price elasticity of demand is infinite, we call it as perfectly elastic or infinite elastic demand. Let us see those types of demands in detail. See, when price elasticity of demand is perfectly inelastic. What do you mean by perfectly inelastic? The elasticity of demand is 0. Now, what do you mean by elasticity of demand is 0? Very simple. When there are changes in price, there is no change in demand. Now, when do you see such kind of thing? That the price are changing and there is no change in demand. Typically, we see for certain products like salt, electricity, or I would say products which are necessary. So, perfectly inelastic demand means there is no change in demand. So, whatever price change happens, there is no change in demand. Graphically, when I try to say, let's say on y-axis you have price, on x-axis you have quantity demanded. So when there are price changes happens, there is no change in the quantity. So if I simply join those points, I see a line parallel to y-axis. So for perfectly inelastic demand, where price elasticity of demand is 0, typically happens for necessary goods like salt and electricity and so on and so forth. The graph is parallel to y-axis, y-axis. It's a vertical line. When elasticity of demand is between 0 to 1, we call it as relatively inelastic demand. Now what happens in case of relatively inelastic demand? That the percentage change in demand is less than the percentage change in price. So what is price elasticity of demand? Is percentage change in demand over percentage change in price. So when demand changes at lesser percentage and price changes at a higher percentage, then elasticity of demand will be less than 1. I'll give you a mathematical calculation. Let's say my demand increases by 25% and my price reduces by 50%. So what happens? It is 25 over 50, it's 1 by 2, 0.5. So price elasticity of demand is less than 1. Now what happens in this case? In this case, the rate at which price is increasing is faster and demand is decreasing is lesser. So if we plot this graph of price elasticity of demand when elasticity of demand is less than 1, we call it as relatively inelastic demand. On x-axis you have quantity demanded and on y-axis you have price. So with more change in price, so from this price to this price, there is a 50% increase in price, but quantity has reduced only by 25%. So if we happen to draw this graph, what do we see? The graph is more steeper. The price increase is faster, but the demand decrease is slower. So it is keep on increasing in this way. Hence, for relatively inelastic demand, elasticity of demand is less than 1. The rate at which demand increases when demand changes over the price change is less. And hence, the graph we plot of quantity demanded versus price is steeper one. You can easily see with this graph that as the price shift from this value to this value, the shift in price is higher, where the shift in demand is lesser. So with less change, there is a high change in price. So if we join this, we try to see that the graph for price elasticity of demand, when elasticity of demand is less than 1, which means relatively inelastic demand, the graph is steeper. For commodities which have unitary elastic demand, what happens? What is unitary elastic demand? That price elasticity of demand is 1, which mathematically means percentage change in demand is same as percentage change in price. Let's say if demand increases by 50%, price decreases by 50%, then the ratio turns out to be 1. This is a unitary elastic situation. And this situation is very rarely we see in real life. Sometimes we happen to see this kind of situations. But if we mathematically draw this graph, what happens? On x-axis, you have quantity demanded. On y-axis, you have price. So the proportionate increase in demand quantity leads into proportional decrease in the price, and we start getting some points. And if we simply join them, you get a rectangular hyperbola. So this is unitary elastic. I go to the next level. This is relatively elastic demand. When price elasticity of demand is greater than 1, we call this situation as relatively elastic demand. What does it mean? The speed with which demand is increasing, or the percentage change in demand, is more compared to percentage change in price. Hence, price elasticity of demand is more. Its basic meaning is the demand is increasing at a faster rate compared to price. So, for let's say an example, if price increases by 20%, the demand changes by 50%. So it is 50 over 25, it's 2 by 1, it's 2. So price elasticity of demand is 2, which means if there is 1% change in price, there are 2% changes in demand happening. And we can seriously see that if we plot this graph where x-axis is your quantity demanded and y-axis is your price, you see what? As there is a less change in price, there is more change in quantity demanded. So if we simply see this and we try to plot this graph, we see a graph is more flatter ones. When this elasticity of demand reaches infinity, we call it as perfectly inelastic demand. That is infinite elastic demand. In this case, where even a negligible change in price leads to an infinite change in demand. So demand is constantly changing, but price is almost remains the same. So price is same, but demand is changing. If we plot these points, we see a horizontal line, a flat line. So infinite or perfectly elastic demand is unrealistic in life, but yes, on graphical level, it shows me a flat horizontal line. In nutshell summary, what is price elasticity of demand? Well, according to Professor Alfred Marshall, price elasticity of demand is the ratio of proportionate change in quantity demanded of a commodity to proportionate change in price of its commodity. Well, the net formula for this is elasticity of demand is change in demand over original demand into original price upon change in price. Well, there are 5 types of elasticity of demand. When elasticity of demand is 0, we call it as perfectly inelastic demand. We get a straight graph where there is no change in demand, even if there is change in prices. Typically happens with sometimes necessary goods and examples like salt and electricity. Relatively inelastic demand, where the speed of percentage change in demand is lesser than percentage change in price. So even at a higher percentage change in price, the demand changes less. The graph is more of a flatter trajectory. For unitary elasticity, we get a rectangular hyperbola, and proportionate change in demand is same as proportionate change in price, or percentage change in demand is same as percentage change in price. So both goes hand in hand. If there is 2% change in price, there is 2% change in demand. For relatively elastic demand, well, the graph is more flatter one, where it tells us that the ratio of percentage change in demand over percentage change in price is greater than 1, which means the demand is increasing at a higher percent compared to price changes. And when the graph is purely horizontal one, we say it's an infinite elastic demand or perfectly elastic demand. In real life, it doesn't happen. Well, understand, while deriving at elasticity of demand, we assume various things like consumers' income, total population, taste, habit, fashion. All those parameters remain same. So the parameters which affects demand, we assume same while establishing the price elasticity of demand.